Most people have no idea what's happening in space right now. Just to be clear, we all hear echoes about space every now and then, right? Elon Musk planning to colonize Mars with his big starship, Chinese rover landing on the far side of the moon, astronauts taking pretty cool no-gravity images from the International Space Station. But I always feel like the press, or even my non-spacey friends, when they talk about space, they always talk about it from a very futuristic, very distant perspective. It's one of those things that seems always so far away, and every conversation has to end up in long, distant, dreamy scenarios that have nothing to do with what's actually happening. And unfortunately, a big part of the mainstream space content I see is always either talking about pretty far future space plans, humans colonizing the system, contacting aliens, crafting lightsabers, etc., or pretty fascinating, mystical, and maybe a bit useless questions. What happens if we get hit by a meteor? What does space sound like? What happens if I drift in a black hole? But what is actually happening in space right now, at this moment? Where are we as a species in terms of progress? Let's have a look. So we all know the basics, right? USA and USSR had that big space race going on about who was going to be the first to send humans to space. The whole thing ends with the Americans reaching the moon and the Soviets kind of falling apart. Anyway, long history for another time maybe. But this is all in the past now. The question is, where are we in terms of human presence in space right now? Well, first of all, today humans are simply not going beyond the low Earth orbit, or LEO. There are plans to go further, of course, but the truth is, human presence has not breached the close Earth proximity for the past few decades at least. And the main active locations for human presence today are only two. One, the International Space Station. Two, the Tiangong Space Station. The ISS is a cooperative project between mainly the USA, Russia, Japan, Europe, Canada. Although there have been visits from astronauts from other nationalities, of course, but these are the main players. The project started 25 years ago. It's still operational today, but the plan is to decommission it by 2031. So clock's ticking. The station is currently hosting 7 astronauts, 3 Russians and 4 Americans in Expedition 71. This crew started in early April 24, and the plan is for them to stay until September 24, which makes this mission quite long compared to others. What are they doing up there? Well, their main jobs would typically be spacewalks outside the station to install or repair equipment, packing some frozen research samples to send them back to Earth, testing the resistance of microbes against antibiotics in microgravity. Overall, it's a big laboratory in space. But apart from all the really cool work being done there, you can probably guess that this is a very strategic, very important asset for the participating countries. I mean, the ISS is literally the most expensive thing ever built by human beings. Ever. We're talking $100 to $150 billion of total cost estimated in 2023, not even mentioning the $3 to $4 billion just to keep it running every year. It's also the largest thing ever built by human beings in space. Well, technically they didn't send it there in one go. They had to send several modules and assemble them together, but it's still the biggest man-made object in space right now. And all those costs and efforts give humanity a super valuable research possibility. We can test complex orbital maneuvers, we can test the impact of space on the human body, and we can definitely conduct a very wide range of research experiments that would simply not be possible on Earth because of gravity. But above all, the ISS is simply the only permanent station human beings have in space today. Or it was, until recently. In 2011, the US Congress passes the Wolf Amendment, which is basically a law preventing NASA from cooperating with China on any of its activities. That includes, you guessed it, the International Space Station. Bear in mind that in 1998, China had expressed an interest to participate in the project, but it got rejected. To put it simply, that unique place where humans could be stationed in space simply became inaccessible to the Chinese. Which is why not a single Chinese astronaut ever set foot on the International Space Station since it was created. What does China do? Easy. Start their own China Manned Space Program. The program is called Project 921, and the third step of it is mainly about putting in orbit their own space station. And they called it Tiangong, which means something like the Sky Palace. Tiangong is the second permanent space station that is currently operational. They launched the first module around 2021, and since then they sent 2 other modules and assembled them to it, which brings the total volume of the station to 3 times smaller than the ISS. There are plans to still expand it though, and the Chinese pride themselves in the way the volume inside is used in a much more efficient way compared to the ISS. Let's be fair, the ISS has the reputation of being quite messy and not necessarily super well organized inside. Tiangong is also much cheaper than the ISS with an estimated cost of 60 billion yuan, $8 billion approximately. Remember, we said $150 billion for the total cost of the ISS and $4 billion just to keep it running every year. Anyway, Tiangong is now up and running, and depending on when you're watching this, it is currently hosting between 3 to 6 taikonauts. So again, what are they doing? Well, recently the station had some trouble with space debris. Basically, very small pieces of junk floating in space hit the station and degraded the equipment a little bit. So they have some spacewalks running to either install some equipment, like solar panels for example, or to repair the damaged equipment after this problem. But one of the big goals of this station is to help China gain experience in terms of human operations in orbit. That includes experience on life in space, on orbital maneuvers, docking maneuvers. There are some things you simply have to try in space in order to learn from them. And since no Chinese capsule can just fly and go dock on the ISS, well, they have to practice on their own. The station has also been used in research in microgravity, just like the ISS. Basically all sorts of experiments for academic or educational purposes on physics, material science, agriculture in space. It's a wide spectrum. Okay, so now we know the existing space stations, but there are other plans coming pretty soon for more human presence in space, especially with the ISS coming to an end. I'm not listing here the more long-term human missions to space, like Mars, for example, where the most optimistic plans are talking about the 2030s. But let's quickly look at sooner and closer projects. So Russia announced plans for its own space station called the Russian Orbital Service Station, or ROS, and the plan is to launch the first module around 2028. India is also planning for its own station. They call it the Bharatiya Antariksha Station. I'm so sorry if I butchered this. And again, the plan is to launch the first module around 2028. But obviously, NASA is on the list, and the plan is a bit more ambitious. NASA has the Artemis program, and the target is a space station on the moon. For this mission, they are using a very big rocket called the SLS and a new flight module called the Orion module. So Artemis is the name of the program, SLS is the name of the rocket, and Orion is the module going to the moon. The first Artemis flight happened already in 2022, and it was a confirmed success despite being quite late and more expensive than planned. Basically, they sent the Orion module to the moon with no crew on board, and after reaching it, maneuvered to come back to Earth and landed the capsule. After this first phase is now finished, the plan is now, in 2025, to send people to the moon with this same module, do one orbit around the moon and come back. If that part of the plan works, the next target becomes sending a new crew of 4 astronauts to the moon in 2026, but with a harder task this time. The plan is reach moon orbit, attach to a human landing system already orbiting the moon, put 2 of the astronauts in that module, descend them to the moon, spend 6 days on the surface with 2 moonwalks planned, climb back up, attach to the Orion module, and come back to Earth. Good luck. Alright, we looked at where we are in terms of human spaceflight today, but what about space exploration? You know those rovers and satellites we've been sending across the system to gather intel for us? Well, it's a story for next time and I have to take off. Stay tuned.